Hello, everyone. Thanks a lot for joining us for the Publicize webinar with Freddie Dawson, who's joining us all the way from jolly old England. So thanks for taking the time out of your day to have a quick chat with us, man. I know you're really busy.
Yeah, no worries. Thanks very much for having me. Happy to be here.
All right, great. Just a quick intro for Freddie. Freddie is a Forbes writer. And he also works closely with large organizations, consults about how they can better work with small businesses. And Freddie, actually, I don't know how long you've been writing and covering the startup beat. So maybe you can start off by giving me an idea of how long you've covered that for Forbes.
So for Forbes, I've been doing for, well, it's coming up on 2 years now. And then before that, I was partially covering startups. It was actually a company that wrote about export opportunities, but a lot of that was SME corporations in the UK and elsewhere. And I was doing that for about 2.5 years before Forbes, with a mixture of other things here and there. Neither of those were sort of full-time. Being a freelancer, there's other jobs mixed into the week as well.
Definitely. And is it right now that you cover UK and international startups?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. So yeah.
All right.
Basically anything outside of the US for Forbes is my ground. But recently they've refocused us a little bit. Now I'm much more focused on London and the UK than I was a couple months ago. It's interesting, but different.
Yeah, definitely. Well, I'm sure, in your tenure there, you've seen plenty of different kinds of startups been pitched a million ways from Sunday. So we think that you're, the perfect person to be providing information for our clients and really anybody else that wants to learn a little bit about getting their story out to the media. So maybe if we could take a quick second so the audience understands, can you give us an idea about what your day looks like writing for Forbes, how many emails, story pitches, assignments, articles you write, etc.? How busy are you?
Sure. Well, like I said, Forbes takes up part of my time. I work for a couple other companies, so I have 3 separate email accounts that I have to go through in the morning that sort of cover all the various areas. And then from there, sort of plan out how my day is going to be. I aim to write, well, on average, about 7 articles in a 5-day week. These are 7 good articles, and then there'll be, a few false starts, a few things that don't work out, and a ton of other sort of supplementary support work that goes around with that. I also do the social media for one of the companies, so I also have to keep an eye on that and plan all those out, and that occasionally involves writing fairly extensive LinkedIn posts and so forth. So, I mean, that's sort of my work target. Quite a lot of emails come in through those 3 accounts, the vast majority of which, as I'm sure anybody who has a work email account knows, is generally not applicable or is dross. Takes a bit of time to sort of pick through and find, what's the best bits. Yeah, and what else did you want to know? So how my day is structured, kind of thing?
Yeah, so I mean, pretty much just fair to say that you're busy. There's a lot coming in and a lot going out. Is that fair to say?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that kind of the goal here is to kind of get a startup founder or somebody that's working with marketing and startups to kind of understand, hey, this is what a journalist goes through, and this is what you're up against when you're trying to compete for their attention. That's being pulled so many ways. Maybe if you could tell us a little bit about why you think it's important for small companies to be featured in the media, or do you think it's important?
Oh no, I definitely think it's a very important step. I mean, there are a number of reasons why. I suppose you could say the main one is that it provides a certain sense of legitimacy about a company, particularly with startups, any name of the business, if me as a consumer or me as a business, depending on what your target market is, if I've never heard of you, seeing you written up in the Guardian or something, or the USA Today or whatever publication you may think of, that gives me a sense of trust that I may not have had from just sort of finding you through Google or something. I realize lots of third-party organizations that are trying to provide that same sort of information through secure keys and so forth, encryption, try and show that yes, this is a legitimate website that's not just going to steal your information and run off into the darkness. But there's a certain extra that is given by being featured in a publication particularly in a positive light, that you do not gain through those other things. I mean, there's a certain sense of competence that would otherwise might not come through. Beyond that, I mean, for a company that's perhaps not looking at those sort of areas, or thinks that it's it's got a very specific niche market that's all it wants to target. There's still quite a lot of benefit from sort of osmosis, as it were. So I mean, you get your name in a publication. Yes, it might not be targeting specifically who you think your customers are, but your customers, they may talk to their friends. They may say, hey, you know what, I was reading the other day, when they meet up in the evening. And, it might get back to someone who does matter, someone who is a potential major customer or a major influencer or a major investor even in your business.
Yeah, that's a good point. So there's obviously like a targeted niche media and more of a mainstream general news media. And can you tell us the difference real quick between both, just in case our audience doesn't know? And can you also tell us, because we're going to be focusing specifically on mainstream media in this talk, can you tell us why it would be important to be featured in the mainstream media for a small company as well?
Sure, yeah. Well, I mean, difference between sort of the niche medias and the mainstream medias, for one, in what they're looking for out of a company, or what companies they're going to be interested in. Niche medias are going to try and cater to their specific niche studies, whether it's a financial magazine that would only be interested in the financial aspects of a startup, or if it's a tech company that might not really care about that same company's financial impact on the markets, but would be interested in their new innovation in coding, all that kind of information. So there'll be different angles, different breakdowns of the same company or the same startup that could feature in different niche publications. I mean, as a general rule, yes, there are some mainstream publications that also have sort of a niche target. For example, I suppose you could say something like Scientific American is a fairly mainstream magazine, but it obviously has a science target, be interested in perhaps other things. And then there are some more business-oriented ones, which are more the point that I'm getting to. Things like the FT would be considered a mainstream publication, but would definitely have a business orientation that would perhaps slightly change what it's looking for and what it's trying to push out to its readers. But for the most part, a mainstream publication is going to be looking for things of general interest to consumers. And unfortunately, this does mean that a lot of startups are going to struggle to initially think of ways to get featured in mainstream publications, simply because they just do not have a business model that will interest the general reader. But there are still ways around that, which I believe we're getting into later in our talk. But
yeah, actually,
is that a decent explanation?
Yeah, definitely. A great explanation. And actually, it kind of leads up into my next question. Can you give some examples of company announcements that would be newsworthy for the mainstream press? And let's focus it on small businesses, like you said, because obviously, Apple hires a new CEO, or even hires a new marketing CMO. And that's big enough news, just because Apple holds that kind of clout. But what types of stories impact the mainstream media that are generated from smaller companies?
Sure. So, I mean, well, I suppose you think back and you think about companies that you've seen feature in mainstream publications. It's someone who's come up with kind of a new innovation or a new product that is something that hasn't been seen before. For some reason, the one that's popped into my head is recently I saw quite a number of posts about a bakery in New York making rainbow bagels. And apparently, this was a big deal for New Yorkers and kind of got disseminated throughout the world. And I believe there's been a few copycat companies springing up in other locations now. So I mean, you know, it's gonna be something that's gonna be fairly general consumer interest. It's gonna have to be something big or different. You know, for your average company, potentially if you get a significant investment, that would be something that could make the news, but it would have to be really, you know, big bucks before many mainstream press would touch it. Launch of a new product or launch of a new idea that really changes how things are done or processes are undertaken, or is a new product available that was previously, you know, not there on the marketplace, something like that. These are the main things that are going to get picked up. Things like corporate so forth are more for your niche publications, sort of modifications, improvements to a product will feature in niche publications, but probably wouldn't feature in the mainstream.
That rainbow bagel example that you brought up kind of seems, does that fall in line with a publicity stunt to kind of create something that obviously is going to have an impact with the community? Maybe we can assume that the rainbow bagel is kind of associated with the gay community, and maybe they were trying to reach out to that specific community or something. Or is that some sort of publicity stunt that would work? And what do you think about publicity stunts in general?
I think you have to be very careful about publicity stunts. I don't think that was necessarily an attempt to reach out to the gay community. This is actually a bad example because I haven't actually read that much about the rainbow bagel companies. But from what I understand, the major innovation was that it's a sweet bagel and it's like a dessert product, and it's obviously brightly colored. You can put ice cream and sprinkles on it and thing. And this was of major interest. Yes, it also has that LGBT edge to it. But if you go out trying to do something like that, there's a lot of potential potholes along the way. On Facebook, there's a group called the Condescending Corporate Brand page or something like that. I'll look it up after this and tell you directly what it is. But they go through, and days like today, St. Patrick's Day, International Women's Day a few days ago, are sort of their field days for them. They go through Twitter and Facebook and they pull up all sorts of vaguely cringeworthy attempts by companies to hop on a bandwagon and get their message or get their product sort of just shoehorned in there. And yeah, there's another organization called Private Eye over here that does the same thing, but takes some really outrageous examples. So you have to be careful with that sort of. But sorry, go on.
No, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I think that's another good thing. I think a lot of times maybe PR professionals, startups as well would search for some sort of tie-in to the news media and or to what's going on in the news. Obviously, a holiday tie-in is pretty obvious. If you're a beer company and you're making a green beer for St. Patrick's Day, there you go. There's your tie-in. But and it might not necessarily be a good tie-in. But how can you, or do you suggest looking for those type of angles that can tie your company into a larger trend? And what goes too far?
I do, in a way, suggest, yeah. But I would suggest that you reach out to journalists as a source of expertise about a specific problem or specific news happening, rather than going, hey, we sell windows, here's a picture of our window with a leprechaun behind it because it's St. Patrick's Day, you know, buy our triple glazing window. That kind of stuff isn't really going to get you very far, and a press release in my inbox with that kind of information isn't going to get featured or anything. But it was just the UK budget a couple days ago as well. Or actually yesterday, was it? Anyway, if you were to reach out to me and say, George Osborne has offered these type of businesses a tax discount from next year, as it happens, we're that type of business, and here's how we think it could affect us. Do you want to talk more? Be something that potentially could lead to an article for me. And I think that's a much more valuable contribution. It's a much more valuable use of my time, and I would say it's a much more valuable use of the startup's time as well. So it's more trying to find instances of expertise that you can use as a springboard to then get featured.
Okay, great. Always adding value is something that probably mantra should be in your head.
Yeah, very good way to put it, actually. Yeah.
Okay, great. Let's go. Let's kind of switch gears here. And let's pretend I am a startup founder who's about to launch my company. How would I go about, or what should I think first, let's say, what are the things that I should have prepared before I go and start reaching out to the media?
Things you should have prepared. Okay, well, you need your basic information, you need your the journalist questions, your who, what, where, when, why, and how. You need a good answer to all 6 of those, prepped and ready. You need a good idea of what you want to achieve. There's no point trying to just scattershot, get featured in for any reason. You should have a good plan for your company. You say, all right, we are a new startup that's going to innovate with how small businesses can process credit card payments, say. So you have your idea of who you want to target and the areas that you want to target, and then you can build your information that will best support that, and then start looking for the journalists and publications who would best fit that genre or the best fit that niche, and instead of sort of buying a bulk mail list from one of these online subscription people and sending out 1,000 emails, 200 of which go to Cosmopolitan magazine or something, which may not ever feature your information. Is that?
Yeah, no, yeah, definitely. So I guess maybe I should have some literature prepared, a press release, or maybe a one-pager about what my company actually does. What are the things that, for example, that you really like when people send the information that they send to you? What's useful for you personally?
Yeah, so that's great. So me, especially if it's a new launch, what I need is those 6 questions answered in as short of a space as possible, short and snappy. Get to the main point. Don't sort of waffle around with tons of unnecessary superlatives. Leading, the best at this, so on and so forth. Company just coming in. Just get to the point with those, and then you can include information below the line. So you have your press release prepared, which is about the launch, and then you can have some more information about the company, the founders, and so forth. That kind of supporting information, sort of interesting facts. Was a convict for the last 20 years and came out of jail with a tech degree and is now doing this. That sort of information is very interesting. In fact, with something like that, you probably should lead with that, to be honest. But anyway, that's another bad example. But yeah, so you can include information about the founders and so forth below the line, and be ready with a much more in-depth and more detailed follow-up if anybody gets back to you. But there's no point sending out, wasting your time drafting a 1,000-word essay that you're going to send out to all these people, because majority of people will be going through 100, 200 emails a day, and they aren't going to read a 1,000-word essay. In fact, a lot of journalists probably won't even get the email unless you specifically have their email address. They'll go through a group email address, which will more than likely be done by an intern. who will then pass it on to the rep they think it's useful. So, I mean, you have to consider the amount of effort that you're putting in for the amount of result that you want to get out.
Well, that's a good point. How would I go about finding the exact journalist that would be really interested in writing my story? How do I research them?
Yeah, sure. So, I mean, I suppose you start by you consider which publications you featured in. You think about your objectives. You find the publications that meet up with that, and then from there you spend a couple days sort of reading through the archives, the current news, and all that, and you find a list of names that you think are of particular benefit, of guys or girls rather who've covered the same sort of territory that your company's in, or have written about similar subjects, or have written something that you find interesting that you think you could contribute something to. Any people like that. And then for me, my best thing is when I'm doing the opposite. When I find something interesting about a company that I want to then write about, I start looking up the founder on LinkedIn and on Twitter, and almost anyone in the media space is going to be on one of those things. You can drop them a message. You can add them as a connection on LinkedIn. That's a great way to get started and get introduced. But it's also a great way to find out more about them. You can read their profiles. You can read their tweets. Get a better idea. Make sure that they are, in fact, it wasn't just a one-off or something, this article, that they are actually interested in that area. That to me would be the best way to go about it. And, just Google their names as well. Lots of people have independent websites and things. You might be able to find a personal email address or something on their personal website.
Okay, great. So once I've found that right person, you mentioned a couple of different things. Add them on Twitter, add them on LinkedIn. But what's the process for going about making that first connection, that cold connection?
Sure. There are multiple ways you can go about it. You can start it soft. You can, if you're approaching them on a personal level, like if you're sending them a LinkedIn message or something, you can, hey, really liked your article about X and Y. As it happens, we're launching a company in 3 months' time or 2 months' time that deals with a similar area. We'd love to chat to you about it more. Twitter, drop them a tweet. Chances are most people on Twitter will have difficulty picking out an individual tweet, but like use it enough. So anybody who tweets at me has a good chance of being read, because I get so few direct tweets that I'll be able to pick it up. You could, if you have their email or if you have a phone number. Phone is a severely underrated tool. From the hall, if you have the direct number, or even a switchboard number, and you're savvy enough to be able to be put through to them, just have a chat with them on the phone. It can be an informal chat. Maybe they'll just be like, sounds interesting, send me an email, but at least you've made contact. They'll know your name, your company's name. When your email comes in, they'll at least recognize it, which gives it a leg up on, 90 of the other emails that are coming in. Personal email wise, you can do the same thing. You can try and just send a press release, generic press release with attention to them. Might work that way as well. Different journalists like to be approached different ways, but as long as you're polite and friendly, I think no one's really going to, no one's going to bite your head off or anything. Everybody wants to chat.
What's your favorite way to be contacted?
Probably one of the first ones I mentioned. I quite like it if someone adds me on LinkedIn and goes, hey, I enjoyed this story. Here's something related, draws a connection. So that I know that they've actually read and done their research and know what they're talking about, and aren't just sort of, searching for the word journalist on LinkedIn or something and emailing the first 100 results that they get. Mm-hmm. So I quite like that approach. I like people being kind of friendly, but distinct to the point at the same time. I mean, there's tons of like little details as well that make a big difference. Like I have Gmail, which I know is quite unprofessional, and I keep meaning to change it. I do need to, but one of the things that if you get an email from a company email, it means it's a lot more professional looking than if you get it from someone's personal Gmail, which does happen quite a lot actually, especially with startups. So I'd suggest making sure that you have a decent email address set up, and you have some of the personal information in there. Like Gmail gives you the ability to put a photo with your email. Personal touches like that help a lot.
Ah, that's a good point, and maybe I can segue real quick. You know, After you get the initial email and maybe it triggers something that you're like, yes, I'd like to look into this more, and you look at a website, how important is how the website looks um, in terms of the legitimacy of the company or how you perceive the legitimacy of the company?
Oh yeah, it's huge. I mean, if it looks like something that was designed in the '90s with the help of Geostes or whatever, you're probably just going to close it. For instance, today I just got an email from a company called Tea and Tequila, which sounded interesting. Interesting concept. Two students out of Bristol setting up this sort of various retail company. But I go to the website and it won't work. So what? I mean, like I can't get any more information from them. So you've got to make sure that it's working. Especially if you're sending out a lot of emails and things, double check that your server has capacity and it's not going to crash. If lots of people do look at it, there's nothing worse than what happened just there. Like it's going to be difficult for me to do anything. I mean, is it worth my while pursuing that now? I might still send them an email. We'll see. But like, you want to make sure that that isn't an issue.
What about other social proof things that might be on the internet? Can we talk real quick? LinkedIn profile or other past stories that might have been written about the company. How do those influence your decision to write a story?
Uh, well, okay. So there's two things about that. So you can either have the negative side of things or the positive side of things. So I mean, you go online and you read that the person's a serial entrepreneur with a few failed companies behind them. That doesn't necessarily mean anything. Like, what's the statistic for the UK? I think it's 90% of startups fail within the first 2 years, and a further 8% fail within the first 5 or something. So it's like 98% failure rate overall. Don't quote me on that, but it's around the right numbers. So I mean, that doesn't necessarily mean anything. You Google them and they're being arrested for fraud, and you're like, oh, that's a bit more of a red flag. Still could be an interesting article. To me, more problematic is if someone else for Forbes has written a good article about them already. Then I need to find something interesting that hasn't been said before, or something unique, or a different angle for the company. So for that regard, I'd say, not just approach one journalist at a time from one company, but like if you've been written about by a media company before, be upfront about that with a new journalist that you're approaching, a new journalist who's holding a conversation. Beyond that, sort of LinkedIn profiles and so forth. Yeah, I mean, you've got to keep them fairly professional. You can be a bit jocular. It's still a social media thing in the end of the day, even though it's a business social media. So, you can joke around, be a bit tongue-in-cheek and so forth. That's fine. But yeah, in the end, you should have all the profile filled out, have a decent picture. I've noticed there's a trend now for people trying to insert their startup job, or not, that's a bad way to put it. They're trying to insert what their startup does into their own name on LinkedIn. So you'll see like Toby credit card readers Jones or something along those lines, and it's a weird trend, and I don't know why it started, but it really looks unprofessional to me, and generally a bit mistrust, bit off-putting, as it were. But yeah, mainly just make sure they have it fully filled out and so forth.
Yeah, for sure. So some takeaways real quick. Have that website up and running, because you don't want to miss out on any chance to get coverage. Also, keep your social media professional, the ones that you want to share with journalists anyway. Maybe if we could kind of pivot back to where we were talking about before, and we had gone through the preparation process of what materials do I need before I reach out. We also went through the process of how to look for the perfect person to write my story. And now maybe we can talk about how to approach these people, and what types of stories we can offer them. And I'm specifically referring to exclusives, embargoes, or non-exclusive stories. And maybe if you could take a quick second to explain those, and then give us your personal opinion just about what you prefer to be pitched with.
Okay, so exclusives, embargoes, and just sort of general stories, non-exclusive.
Yes, sir.
Is that right?
Yeah.
Cool. Well, I mean, quick definition: exclusive means that it is solely for that just, and you aren't going to give that story to anyone else. Embargo means that it is going out to a large number of people, and none of those people should write about it before a specific point in time. And non-exclusive is, of course, just your general. Here's the press release about what's happening. Hope you feature it. Kind of thing. For me, I believe that exclusive is overused, although it has dropped off recently. Maybe it's because I keep saying that all the time. But right, a lot of startups in particular seem to come in with thinking that they've got the best idea since sliced bread, as it were, and they want to exclusively offer this to a journalist, and the journalist will turn around and look at the story and go, okay, it's vaguely interesting, but is it going to change my life if I'm the one who covers this and no one else does? No, I mean, it's a decent story, or it's not a decent story. It doesn't matter. To me, exclusive should be something that is very unique and very different, and should be done with a journalist that you have an established relationship with. It should be, you shouldn't just be cold calling or blindly pushing out offers for exclusives to unknown journalists. Now, that's just my opinion. Maybe other journalists quite like receiving random offers for an exclusive and think it's quite useful.
What's the biggest mistake you think you could make when offering exclusives?
Biggest mistake you can make? Well, I suppose it would be overvaluing the content. Actually, no. I take that back. The biggest mistake you can make is offering an exclusive and then not giving the journalist quite enough time to respond. And then they come back and say, yes, I would quite like that exclusive. And you go, oops, I've already offered it to someone else who's accepted. That, personally, to me, that is the trouble with an exclusive, is that it becomes a very slow process, because you have to be quite careful about pitching it to journalists and then not crossing it over with another pitch. So you need a long lead time before the exclusive actually sort of comes into play, as it were.
Okay, thanks.
So yeah, that's something to be careful of. Is just watch. Embargoes. Again, I mean, use them only if there's a purpose. Like, a lot of companies will send out, this is embargoed until midnight on Thursday, and it's just sort of a general announcement of something. Only use it if there's specific sensitive reasons why you should use it. We're about to have an IPO. It's embargoed until such time as we're legally allowed to announce that we have an IPO. something like that. Don't just put out something with an embargo simply for the sake of putting out something that is embargoed. There's just no point. Also, don't be afraid about putting out sensitive information to journalists before it can go out. It has happened, but it is very, very, very rare for a journalist or a media organization to violate an embargo, and people and organizations that do it usually pay a hefty price for doing it, and very rarely repeat that.
Maybe for somebody that doesn't know, because obviously an embargo is not a legally binding contract. It's sort of a gentleman's agreement.
Yeah.
So maybe, so what would be a punishment, or how would a journalist be treated the next time if they did break an embargo and publish something ahead of the specified time?
Well, I mean, it would be sort of a combination. It would be sort of a social punishment, as it were. A lot of other journalists would certainly think less, and be a lot more reluctant to work with that journalist. A lot of PR agencies would either stop sending that journalist information entirely, or certainly only send later than they send it to other people, or send general information. The offer for anything interesting that would be held under embargo would certainly be restricted. More to the point, the publication that allowed that to happen would probably come under some sort of fire. Depending on the specifics of the embargo, it could, in fact, lead to legal action in certain circumstances if they were to do that. But for the most part, it would just be sort of a social punishment more than anything else.
Okay, cool. So a takeaway for embargo is basically make sure the information warrants that type of story. It has to be a pretty big announcement for an embargo to work properly.
Yeah.
Okay, sounds good. And moving on to the final one, which was just a non-exclusive general outreach. Can you reach out to, with this type of outreach, can you reach out to multiple people at once?
Oh yeah, of course. I mean, that's the point of it. I would still say, make sure that you're not wasting time and effort around the place. Make sure that you're still sending it out to relevant journalists, a relevant read list, not just to an entire database or something. Spend a little bit of time targeting it and making sure that it's going out to the publications and journalists that you most want to read it. I mean, that's just more of a common courtesy than anything else. Like, if it's a general release information, then there's no harm in it with other people. But we all get tons of email anyway, so the more we can do to combat that, the better. I know that Publicize, one of their big things is the for immediate release on press releases, and that this is a big no-no, which I agree with. It's kind of a weird way to start a press release. I mean, if you're sending out a press release, if it doesn't say otherwise, it's obviously for immediate release. You don't really need to reiterate that. You should just get straight into the meaty stuff, because you've got about 80 words to hook someone's attention, and if you don't do it then, it's probably just on to the next email. So good headline, good if you can get a subheading in, good to get a secondary headline in, and good to get a very, very good first sentence in, and try to avoid a reverse clause in the first sentence. Try to avoid although blah blah blah, this company is now doing this, but this company is now doing this, although blah blah blah. A lot of times with a clause, you're putting the more important information second. And I've noticed this a lot in press releases recently.
Yeah, I think that's huge, and you mentioned some things to keep out of pitches and press releases, and just to kind of recap, I think they're valuable to recap, is that, don't use buzzwords. Don't call yourself the leading anything, because those things are just going to be, completely overlooked by a journalist, and they really want just what it is that you're doing. And they should, if you're pitching a journalist, I think within that covers the industry that you cover, they're gonna know maybe even more than you, who competitors are. And so they're going to be able to see right away through, hey, we're the leading or we're the first. So just leave those out and let your company kind of speak for itself and the things that you do. Is that something that you might agree with?
Definitely, yeah. That's a very good summation. And actually, also one other thing that I always say is make sure to spell out or explain acronyms. Even if you're talking to a tech journalist or someone who doesn't know the industry very well, there are so many three-letter acronyms that are the same, if not similar, and it is very easy to read through something quickly and think that someone's referring to one acronym when in fact they're referring to another, or to read through one and just not remember what that is. It's very useful. It doesn't take very much time to just spell it out, put it in brackets, and then after that, throughout the press release, you can just refer to it by the acronym.
That's a really good point, and maybe you can also tell me about kind of industry jargon. Let's take like the healthcare industry, for example, and we can talk about electronic health records, EHRs, that sort of thing that probably will a journalist that is specifically focused in on that industry will understand. But how much of that should you leave out of your pitch, and how basic should you make it? If you can kind of elaborate on that.
Sure. Personally, I'd say you leave out as much of it as humanly possible. You make the pitch as simple as possible. You make the pitch so that a high school student will be able to understand it. You don't need specific industry knowledge to understand it. I know it's going out to a person who probably has that specific industry knowledge, but it's a good practice. It'll help you think about your company and what it does much more concisely, and it'll help you write a better press release in the end. The more industry jargon, the more acronyms, the more superlatives and so forth you have in there, the worse the press release is going to be, even if the recipient understands it and knows what you're talking about.
Yeah, I think something that we try to do at Publicize is kind of, hey, how do I explain what you do to a fourth grader? That really challenges us to take something very complex and really explain it in the easiest way possible, which is going to actually be super important because you're trying to reach a broader audience. You're not necessarily trying to reach your co-founder who understands completely what you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. And I especially noticed this. This is a bit of a weird thing to say, I suppose, but I especially noticed this with startups that were started by people from a law background. A lot of times, I suppose, because they're so into the nuance of the law, they want to go, we can't just say that very basic statement. We have to put in all the caveats and the explanatory bits so that it makes sense. It's like, no, I understand where you're coming from, but you can just say that this is basically what we do, and then follow it up and explain in more detail, either further down the press release or in an email. You don't need to cram everything into the first line with a couple footnotes, a couple clauses, and a couple things in parentheses. You can simplify it out and spread it out a bit more.
Okay, cool. So that leads into my next question. So let's say we made a really basic pitch, which is understandable to a fourth grader, and a journalist bites. They're interested and they want to know more. What type of information should I give a journalist about my company? Do I have to hide anything? I think maybe that some startup founders. It looks like we lost Freddie real quick.
You hear me?
Freddie, you there? Yeah, I can hear
Can you
you.
hear me?
Just I can hear you. Can you
Did
hear
we?
me?
Oh,
Yeah, I can't see you though.
can you see me now? It went black and came back.
No, I still can't hear you, but or see you, but I can hear you. Maybe you want to try exiting out of the window and then coming back.
Right out. One sec.
Okay. Sorry about this, guys. Testing a new platform out, and so far it's worked really well. So hopefully we'll have Freddie back here in a second. Maybe I can take this time to let you guys know that at the very end we'll be doing a. Hey, Freddie, welcome back.
Can you see me now?
Yeah, I can see you now. Hey, real quick
Excellent.
before we get back into it, I just wanted to tell the listeners that we're going to have a short Q&A period, and if they look at the right side of their screen, they should have a box where you can write in some questions. So if you've had any burning questions throughout this that you want to ask Freddie, please do write them, and we'll spend the last 10 minutes or so allowing him to answer your questions. All right, so Freddie, now that we have you back, I appreciate it if we just hop right back into that question, kind of about, hey, do I need to hide anything from the media? I think maybe there's kind of this connotation about PR in general, where we're kind of gatekeepers between a company and the media to make sure, hey, a company doesn't say anything wrong. But I think in general, in the terms of the startup world, it's not something that should be as you shouldn't worry about it as much. I think because I think maybe the media tends to build people up and then break people down, and if you haven't been built up yet, then you really have nothing to hide. But maybe you could give me a little bit more information. That's my personal opinion, but what do you think about that? What should I not keep from a journalist if I'm a startup founder?
No, yeah, I completely agree. There's a tendency to sort of what's the word? Run everything to a sort of a corporate lens. So you take a statement and you sort of wash it down, and by the time it actually gets to a journalist, particularly from bigger companies, it's been re-edited 3 times and is basically a banal comment that says nothing. As a startup, you probably don't have that luxury. Like Microsoft can send out a statement that says nothing about pretty much anything, and it'll probably be included because it's Microsoft sending that. In order for a startup to stand out of the crowd, really you should be saying something controversial, something a bit interesting. About if stuff to keep back about your own company, that's entirely a matter of personal preference. A lot of businesses seem reluctant to discuss financial figures and turnover. I don't really understand why that is. I think, and this is new from Forbes as well, this is now apparently one thing that they want to see more of. So I've got to start asking more of the people who I interview for indicators of scale, essentially. So they don't want to know, your full financial. I don't need to know your full financial history and background, but I do need to have some idea of whether you're a minnow in the industry or a trout. Some indicator of how things are growing, how things are growing, how much revenue is expected, forecast, things like that. And I don't understand why startups are very reluctant to say anything at all about this particular issue. There's 1,000 ways that you can give a few statements that hold back whatever it is that you're unhappy about getting out there, and still get enough information to get the point across. Other than that, let's see. Yeah, don't be afraid to give stuff off the record as well. Majority of journalists will honor something off the record, or personally for me, if someone wants, don't do it with a journalist you don't know at all, I suppose, because there are journalists who may turn around and burn that bridge. But if you know someone fairly well, you've established a rapport, this isn't just the first time you're talking to them, you can give stuff to them off the record. A couple times companies have done that about various issues, and I've come back and, hey, look, that's by far the most interesting thing someone's ever said. If you don't want your name attached to it, fine, but would you mind if I print it as a source who declined to be named or something like that? And, the majority of the time, that's absolutely fine. Personally, I don't think there's a whole lot that you need to hold back or you need to hide from a journalist, but of course, I'm going to say that as a journalist.
Okay, cool. Thanks, Freddie. We're winding down here, but I think there's a pretty good question that I have for you about. So obviously, we're not Microsoft's. We're not huge companies that are rolling out new products, that are testing new things, that have R&D labs that are creating the next driverless car, etc. So we don't have an announcement every month. But what's a good way for a startup to build a relationship with the journalist, keep themselves in the media constantly, although they might not have a specific announcement about their company for 6 months at a time?
Yeah. Well, like we were talking about earlier, you think about news announcements, and you think about ways that you can be an informed source about things. And, sometimes this requires a little bit of out of the box thinking. For instance, I've just spoken to a company that works as in the advertising business, something that I wasn't writing about, but the founder happened to be an expat from New Zealand living in the UK, and the UK has recently announced changes to permanent residency, where you have to have 35,000 minimum salary now, to make a long story short, in order to permanent resident here. And there's been a lot of outcry that this is going to really affect entrepreneurs. So knowing that she was a New Zealander living over here, reached out to her, said, no, it's not really your area, but, actually she reached out to a friend of mine, and then I reached out to her because of that. Said, not really, it's not really your area, but do you have any comment about the changes to migration policy? And she came back to me with a bit of information. So her company will get a mention in an article that I'm writing for Forbes recently. So it wouldn't be something necessarily that you would have thought of as an advertising agency, but there you go. That's the way she got featured, or her company got featured. So yeah, you think about who's in your company, what you do, what expertise you have about anything really, and anything that comes up topical, you can always approach someone.
Okay, great. I just want to see if anybody in the audience has any questions. If you do, please go ahead and you can write them in the comments section. We'd be happy to have any. Oh, it looks like Judy with Dada Inc. has one. Hi, Freddie. How do you feel about the effectiveness of guest articles? What are best practices for them? We are a platform where people talk to each other with drawings, and we love guest articles, but we are frustrated that we can't use our experience as an example. When it is allowed to, when is it allowed to write a guest article in which you can talk about your product?
So you mean guest articles written by your company that appear in mainstream publications and so forth?
Yeah, like a thought leadership piece that would be authored by Judy about that would give value to a specific, a specific area or audience, and I think the challenge that she's talking about is, how do we avoid this becoming a native advertisement or being way too promotional? Those are some of the hurdles I think that when you're pitching to editors that they look out for. So maybe we can end it right here with, when is it allowed to write a guest article in which you can talk about your product? Is it ever allowed?
Okay. To me, I don't think it should be necessary as such that you have to talk about your product. I mean, Forbes actually has a decent policy about this. As a journalist, I'm a bit ambivalent. The idea of guest articles in companies writing, but Forbes does it admittedly quite well. They have a policy where they have a number of companies that have signed up to write articles for them, and their policy is simply that those companies cannot write about themselves as such. They can write about the industry they're in, things that they're interested in, and so forth. But you find if you read through sort of 6 or 7 articles by one of these companies, that despite the fact that they are not talking about themselves and they're not talking about the products that they are selling or that they're doing, they're still getting positive information out there about their company. They're getting information surrounding the area, you know, that they're working in. They're getting that out there, and by just association, they're getting their name out there, and they're getting information about their product and what they're getting their point across, their 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 side of any debate.
Yeah. So, would you say that, these types of articles can be directed directly at the type of audience they want to be signing up and purchasing their product and providing value to that audience? I don't know if you're the one to answer this question, but do you think that by building that trust, by providing information that they might be looking for without even knowing it, does that help a brand image? Does that and like I said, maybe as a journalist you might have a different opinion, but maybe as a person, if you were going to read a blog by a company and it was just all promotional, versus it had information about, I know you write for another Ecig magazine, for example, so I assume that you probably read e-cigarette company blogs to find some information. And if they're not entirely promotional about their product, do you find that information useful? And as a consumer, would you maybe adapt your adapt's not the right word. Would you maybe kind of adopt them as a leader in the space and have that trust built?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, it does. It happens quite often where you're reading through stuff. You're reading through Twitter and things like that, especially. And a lot of companies use Twitter as a mini blog that they'll be talking about the area of business that they're in, and tips and trades for startups and so forth. And you read things like that, and it's quite interesting. E-cigs actually is kind of a fascinating space as well, because you do have companies like British American Tobacco where they are, expressly prohibited from talking about a lot of their products. I mean, it's illegal for them to write a blog post about Lucky Strike cigarettes or whatever. So as a result, I mean, the only way they can get this information out or write is to write around the area, to write about legislative happenings, about some of the research that they're doing, about things like that. So they have to sort of build brand awareness through an indirect means almost. Actually,
how that is for them.
Sorry?
How successful do you think that is for them?
It's interesting. I mean, I don't write enough about their tobacco products to really comment on that, and because the law is slightly different from the e-cig products, they've been treating them differently. And yeah, there's a lot of distrust and dislike amongst the e-cig community of tobacco companies and tobacco products, which they've not done a good job addressing. But they have also done a very good job at reaching out into the general market and attracting first-time e-cig users, long-time smokers in to try products. So you could say that they've done a good job at initially attracting people, but they've failed to then done a good job at building intrigue about their brand, but then they've failed to build a brand or build a brand image that has then kept those people in.
Okay. Okay. Cool. Well, yeah, I think I kind of hijacked that question a little bit. So just to make sure we get back and get Judy's question answered, when is it allowed to write a guest article in which you can talk about your product? Is that something maybe that's best saved for a company blog, or where do you think? Can it get on a major publication?
I mean, you're not going to really be able to write a guest article that talks about specifically your product unless you're paying them a large amount of money. I would say that, and then it'll probably be branded as advertorial or something. Say that if you're a chance to write a guest article, and particularly if you want that chance to come again, you should avoid being very in your face about promotion, about writing about your product. You should be, you can mention what your company does if it's relevant to the article and so forth, and in that mention of your product in there. But I would try to avoid, preaching about the product for the majority of the article. There's, like we're saying, there's benefits for talking around the area and indirectly building up your product and brand.
Okay. Thank you. Does anybody else have a question they'd like answered? All right. I'll give it a couple more seconds to see if anybody writes in, but I wanna throw this in there, Eddie, Freddie, because I know that you said you were gonna have a hard time answering this question, so I'm gonna put you on the spot. And actually, we'll save that one for last because Anita came in with a great question. Are guest posts an ideal alternate way to leverage PR firms?
What do you mean by leverage PR firms? So, what?
Yeah,
Go to a PR firm and say, "Oh, well, we can get this coverage ourselves through guest articles." So, what benefit are you going to bring in outside of that?
Can you explain that a little bit more, Anita? If we don't have enough juice for leading publications, I'm still not following. Are you saying is a guest post a good alternative for when you don't have an announcement for a leading publication, or are you trying to say something else? I'm sorry, I just don't follow the question. Okay. Okay, so yes, are guest posts a good alternative for when your company doesn't have a big enough announcement to get on a leading publication?
Yeah, I'd say they are. They're a good way to, if you don't have any sort of major announcement, if you don't have new product coming out, or if you aren't getting major source of funding, a guest post, on your own blog, or preferably if you can in on some other media source, would be a way that you can show your expertise, demonstrate that you're what you're talking about, that you're still involved in the sector, that you're up on top of developments and so forth, without having to sort of shoehorn this information into a press release or something to go out to journals. Also, I think it's very useful to do to keep your company website updated. So, every couple weeks, every month or so, having a new item come up on your website helps keep things fresh, helps keep things interesting. It always is a bit weird when you get an announcement or something or you read about a company, is usually what happens, and then you look at their website and their last press release or news update or blog post or anything was from, say, March 2015. It's like, well, what's this company been doing for the last year?
And that doesn't necessarily have to be, you know, a new product that, or release or anything. It can just be as simple as a new blog post or
Yeah.
you mentioned.
Yeah, anything that takes your interest, basically, talk about Google's new driverless cars and how that is going to affect your particular sector. Any sort of anything that can be turned into a way to talk about you. Again, it takes a little bit of outside thinking, a little bit of left field stuff, but you can usually find something somewhere that is relevant to your business that you can use as a launching board for more information.
Okay, cool. Thanks. And Anita says thank you for answering that question as well. If anybody else has any last minute ones, we can take one last question from the crowd. All right, Freddie. Well, I'm gonna throw you mine. In your multiple years of covering the startup community, what are 3 things that you've learned about startups?
Right. Well, yeah, we discussed this earlier, and I still haven't unfortunately come up with a greater answer than my initial thoughts. So I'll give you my initial thoughts, and I hope that they're of some value. I mean, number one is I didn't realize just how vast the startup and entrepreneurial scene was. You read about some of the major deals and so forth. When I first came when I first started writing about export opportunities and so forth, I just had no idea how basically any problem, any little wrinkle, any innovation you've had, you think about it, and there'll be some startup out there doing something along those lines, something similar. I had no idea that there are just so many little companies out there, so many serial entrepreneurs trying out new ideas all the time. And I suppose the second thing is quite loud outside. No idea how much money was behind it. Before writing about this sort of stuff, I mean, I'd heard of venture capital funds and venture capitalists, angel investors in a very vague sense, Dragon's Den, Shark's Tank, that sort of stuff. I didn't realize how big of a driver of economic growth startups and small businesses were. And I suppose the final thing that I'd say is I also didn't realize coming in how open and generally friendly and chatty majority of people in startups are. I've very, very rarely sent an email or a tweet or something to an entrepreneur or someone involved in startups and not had them come back and say, yeah, sure, would love to chat. I've got 5 minutes in 2 days and that's it. But if that's all right, then we can go for it. And I mean, ages ago now, my first job coming out of university was writing for a magazine in the food manufacturing industry. And people in the food manufacturing industry are very, very secretive. And the default assumption is that you're out to screw them. So it was a pleasant surprise coming here and having companies wanting to talk, willing to talk about anything, to go, hey, no, I don't know anything about that, but my friend Meg, she's huge into that. Let me give her your email address and you can both chat about it tomorrow. And that to me was probably the biggest surprise about the startup industry. Did some other question come in the meantime?
Yeah, it looks like we have one from Ken. Does it make sense for a marketing firm not focused on PR to hire a journalist like you to manage the PR side of things and yet be transparent to the client? Or is that something Publicize can do? I can field the second part of the question if you want to go ahead and field the first.
I mean, I would say that you need a PR person to do PR. You try and hire someone like me to do it, and we'll have ideas and we'll have information, but there's nothing that beats experience. I mean, someone who knows PR is going to be a lot better than a journalist. What I would say is that possibly a journalist could help consultation point of view, sort of maybe provide some feedback on pitches and so forth. But I don't know very many journalists who are then going to, turn around and open up their journalistic contact book on a commercial basis, because they're going to rapidly lose that book if they suddenly start bugging their friends and colleagues with pitches and so forth. And they don't have necessarily the skills and wherewithal and experience to generate that sort of impact otherwise. And they would be legally in trouble if they started writing about the company that they're receiving money from themselves for their publication. So personally, I'd say you need a PR person.
Yeah, and I'll field the second part. I think that first of all, Publicize is definitely a PR company, and we are staffed by a lot of former journalists. I think that that also is something. It's something that's pretty important, because we might be able to smell out something that would be more marketing versus more newsworthy. But I also think that PR has kind of been treated as a black box that you can't touch as a startup founder. And I think that's kind of ridiculous. Really, I do believe that the media is attainable. You can approach them and do it as well. There's definitely techniques that work and techniques that don't, as we're hopefully educating you guys a little bit on here. But yeah, if you'd like Ken to talk more, I'd love to put you in touch with some more people at Publicize, and we can talk about your company and things that you need as well. But we can say that for another time, and I definitely will. I'll reach out to you with an email and some more information. But first of all, it looks like we have lost Freddie. But if he does come back, I just wanted to say, first of all, to you guys, thank you very much for taking the time to spend this afternoon with us, and I hope you learned something. We will do this again. We'll definitely have Freddie back. Freddie was our reporter in residence for 6 months, and this is actually his last webinar as reporter in residence, but Freddie will definitely be back. We'll also have other editors and former writers as well in the lineup. In April, we'll have Dylan Tweeney from VentureBeat, who was an editor there. He's also wrote for Wired and other publications. So we'll stay tuned. I'll be sure to put everybody on the outreach list. And if you have any questions, please contact info@publicize.co. And we can answer any more. Again, thank you very much for your time, and thank you, Freddie, for your time as well, and we'll see you next time.